Hey everyone, it's Lucy, the producer of Deadly Debbie's Creepy Files. I hope you guys are enjoying the show. I also wanted to let you know about a podcast that I discovered recently, which I would really love you guys to know about. It's an incredible fiction podcast which tells stories of the paranormal. It's feature length, it's atmospheric, it tells spooky stories told on the 13th of every month. And you get to explore an eerie universe of supernatural and occult tales. Now, I'm going to play just 30 seconds of audio from one of the stories that are told on the show. Guys, this is such a well-made show. The sound effects, the storytelling, literally gives me goosebumps, and I absolutely love listening to this. I just know if you love Deadly Debbie, you're going to really love this show too. So check it out. The link is in the show notes. It's called 13. And here is a little taster.
But then I saw it. Chelsea was facing me. And so was her reflection.
Hey, what's wrong? Baby, are you okay?
Just then, the power went off. And I heard glass breaking.
Well, hello there, my little bats of the night, and welcome to episode 3 of season 2. Well, it's a beautiful evening tonight. The rain is pouring down, and there has been a storm going on for hours. Oh, it's just wonderful. I'm going for a lovely long walk now. Well, you have to get them in while the weather is nice. You sit back and listen to our creepy stories for this week. I wonder, have you ever heard a strange breathing noise coming from somewhere? When I was in the 4th grade, we all moved to Mississippi. We moved into a mid-sized 3-bedroom ground-level house. It was pretty old, and there were several neighbours living close by. We lived there for several months before anything started to happen. My first memory is getting up in the middle of the night to go to the toilet. As I was at the toilet doing my business, I heard heavy breathing outside the bathroom window. The window itself was very small. It was open, so I could hear crickets and such outside too. From the outside, the bathroom window was probably 11-12 feet off the ground. I can remember being a bit scared, but I wasn't petrified at that time. I went back to bed and eventually fell asleep. A few nights later, I heard it again. This time, it was coming from outside my bedroom window. My window was open and very low to the floor. It was so low to the floor I could duck through it and walk outside, which I had done many times. The breathing was loud, and it was so close I could have reached out and touched whoever it was. I did get scared then. I got under the sheets and covered my head. The next morning, I asked my brother about it. He and I shared a room. He was on one side and I was on the other. He said he hadn't heard anything and seemed very disinterested. My grandmother's room was right next to ours, and I asked her about it. She made a joke and ridiculed me, so I didn't ask her anything else. I told my parents about it, and my dad dismissed it too. Fuck, I said to myself, why won't anyone believe me? The breathing became more pronounced and louder and more frequent. One night, it was coming from my closet. Now it was in the house. My bed was right next to the closet, The shelves in the closet doubled as rungs into the attic, and the thought that something could come out of there and take me up there scared the hell out of me. I went to wake my parents up, and they got really angry with me. They told me to go back to bed, so I did. All night long, I heard the breathing, and I never did get used to it. I began to plead with my parents to believe me. Then one day, in broad daylight, I was in the living room watching television. My mother was in the kitchen making dinner. My dad was at work. My brother was out of the house, and my grandmother was next door visiting the neighbour. I heard my mother scream and a glass break. I ran into the kitchen just in time to see the screen door slam shut. I followed whoever it was outside, but there was nobody there. My mother said it looked like a hobo, a homeless man who was extremely dirty and tattered. The neighbour said the description sounded like a guy named Homer Rules or Riles, something like that. Anyway, he died years prior and was a heavy smoker. He made his living doing odd jobs at people's houses. That was the first and last time anyone in the family saw anyone. Heck, that person could have been some transient that stumbled into our house. One night, my grandmother turned on every light in the house, knocking on the walls and bedroom doors and telling us to get up. My dad woke up, and Grandma said someone was under her bed. My dad, my brother, and me all got down on our hands and knees and looked under the bed, but there was nobody there. Still, we could hear the loud, raspy breathing that I had been trying to tell everyone about for weeks. My brother and I slept in the living room with Grandma that night. From then on, we all went to bed expecting to hear the breathing, but we never talked about it. My parents didn't make fun of me anymore either. Eventually, we moved out of that house, and occasionally I could still hear the breathing years after we moved out. It was like it followed me, but it didn't stick around. We moved back to Wyoming when I was 14, and I haven't heard it since. In February of 2020, just before the pandemic really took over here in Boston, I adopted 2 pet rats. Their names were Thelma and Louise. They were in this cramped little cage in the pet store, and they really wanted to get out. I felt so bad for them, I adopted them there on the spot. It was one of the most impulsive decisions I've ever made. I never had rats before, but I always wanted them. They were the best pets I had ever had, especially during the early years of the pandemic, when everything was shut down and you had to stay at home. I credit the rats for bringing out the nurturing side of myself more so than any other pet, making me a more compassionate and positive person. I started meditating as well. Unfortunately, Thelma passed away a few months after I got her. A mammary tumour. I confused it with being overweight at the time. Louise kept me company and happy for the next 10 months. During that time, she also developed a mammary tumour. I took her to the vet multiple times. However, the surgery to get it removed was just too expensive for me. Not being able to afford it, I decided to give her the best life possible until her death. In March this year, she took a turn for the worst. For a whole week, she was lethargic and not eating her normal foods or drinking from her water bowl. She got very skinny. I had to feed her soft foods like blueberries or yogurt to get her to eat something. During this whole week, aside from being at work, I kept her by my side, either in my arms or next to me. I even kept her in bed with me while I slept. I did my best to comfort her during this whole period. I repeatedly told her I loved her and kissed her as much as I could. On a bright, sunny, warm day on my front porch after I got back home from work one day, Louise took her final breath and died in my arms. I made a silent promise to her that I would meditate when she died as a way to thank her and Thelma for making me a better person. As I'm meditating in my room with my dead rat in a box in front of me, I begin to hear some rustling in Louise's cage. Something was walking or rummaging around in the bedding. This stirred me out of my meditation enough to check it out. Nothing. There was nothing in the cage. I go back to my session. About 30 seconds in, I hear the food bowl being disturbed, followed by the sound of a rodent nibbling on food. I break out of my session again to check it out. Still nothing. I check my rat in the box. The rigor mortis was just setting in. She was quite dead. We've never had any trouble with wild rats or mice around here in the 10 years I've lived here, so it couldn't be pests. I live in the upstairs apartment in a 2-family house, so it couldn't be any squirrels or rabbits outside the window. I'm open-minded to UFOs and Bigfoot, and I'm also skeptical. I've had a couple of paranormal experiences as a kid, however the skeptical side of me is willing to write those off. I never saw a ghost, but I know what I experienced, and I know what I heard. I know exactly what it sounds like when a rat is eating or playing around in their cage. This event has definitely made me more open-minded to spirits, and quite possibly an afterlife. I believe Louise came back for a snack after a week of not eating. I also firmly believe that the rat is now my spirit animal. If you give your pets lots of love, maybe they'll come back to visit you too. I realised that the following could all just be a hallucination, as I was very young. Nevertheless, it is still so remarkable how clear I remember it. This is 100% my experience. When I was about 7, I lived in an old mining town, Alma, Colorado, up in the Rockies. It had less than 100 people who lived there at the time. Our family, many brothers, and our mum stayed in a little cabin on Main Street for a good while. We would run around town playing. We saw so many off stuff in that town. One of my brothers says he saw a full apparition in the store next door over, trying on clothes, and then vanished once it noticed him. The town and the abandoned places we snuck into fueled our imaginations for sure. There were many nights I would see this silent, floating mist flow around objects in our shared room, sometimes body-sized or smaller clouds. It scared me so much at first, and I always tucked my head under the covers. It moved randomly, but also kind of not. It really moved and looked like this. Imagine each bird representing a semi-lit white dot or point. It didn't light up surroundings. It was a dull white without a glow or sheer. On one particular night, it went from unnerving to downright what the hell is going on. By now, after so many nights, I started to get used to seeing it, or them, that I started watching instead of hiding my head. I started to see more behaviour from it, like splitting up into streams and rejoining as it flowed around. When leaving the room, usually because of a waking family member, it would move out of the door or even through the wall. Sometimes I would just pass out before knowing whether or not it left. During each of these visitations, it gave me the impression that it was aware of me, aware of it. It's hard to describe. It's like it was saying something to me without me hearing it, without me hearing anything. It was notioning to me. On this one crazy night, it started really paying too much attention to me, flying over me, splitting up into multiple streams that individually broke off into different directions, some of which startled me as they flew towards and over me. I quickly hid my head under the blanket, but one thin stream flowed through the blanket and wound around inside the airspace I was creating with my arms. As it crossed just above my eyes, I saw each individual white point that made up the cloud. They were tiny, tiny shapes that all I can describe them as are universal shapes. Triangles, circles, squares, spirals. There were a few other shapes that I couldn't identify or understand at the time. The stream was still flowing around inside, but one side was incoming and the other side was outgoing through the blanket. Then the new stream trendles of thin streams came through in and out of my blankets. I was scared enough that I wanted to run, but then it notioned to me that everything is okay. My emotions flatlined to feeling just okay about it. I pitched a tent to watch the streams move in and out, sometimes whizzing past my eyes, in which I would again see the shapes. I was a quiet kid, and each time it happened, I didn't want to wake anyone up about it. I wouldn't even know what to say. The swarm always left if anyone woke up anyway. So this night, being as intense as it was getting, I got up and went into the living room just outside my door where my mum and her boyfriend slept on a pull-out couch. As I approached their bed, I stopped dead in my tracks and saw a small, faint white cartoon character standing on the face of my mum's boyfriend. This is where I was almost full panic. It was about 3 inches tall, and it looked like just some generic cartoon man. It had a kind of weird smile. I couldn't tell if it was smiling or sneering. It pointed to his mouth, and a talk bubble appeared over the cartoon's head. Only I could understand it. The words didn't make any sense. Only I couldn't understand it. The words didn't make any sense. I got the feeling it was asking me if I could jump down into his mouth. I stood there wild-eyed, shaking my head. No, 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 don't do that. It looked at me and then jumped over to my mum's face. Again it pointed at her mouth, same talk bubble. I was shaking and I thought out to it, please don't. It nodded slowly with a smirk as if to say, I'm going to, whether you like it or not. It then jumped up into her mouth. I freaked out and woke her up. I got yelled at to go back to sleep. This was so vivid, it's impacted me through all these years. Nothing more came of it. I sometimes saw the shape mist after that night, but it was always short and never interacted with me again. I never saw it again once we left that town to move to California. I've come to feel like it didn't actually mean any harm, but again, it might have been sleepwalking or hallucination, as children really do naturally. Even if it was, I still think about those strange shapes to this day. I'm still not sure I know what they were, but they were real.
This story takes place in a small town in Nebraska. Before we begin this story, let me tell you about this small town. Everyone knows everybody, including the history of the town and the bloodline of everyone's history. It feels like once you enter this town, nobody leaves. Let me help you picture this house I had moved to in 2017. The house has 3 doors. One door facing my neighbor's long gravel driveway. The main other door facing the restless field of weeds and hidden house in the back you can just tell was left behind many years ago. And the last door is located in the living room, which enters to the backyard for our dogs. It has 3 bedrooms and 3 bathrooms upstairs with a narrow kitchen. The living room has this antique fireplace, which you can tell is handmade and has been there since the house was built in 1954. Please keep these doors in mind for the later events I'm about to tell you. Once we were moving into the fixer-upper house, we were discussing how this was going to be the perfect house for our family. But I just knew this was by far not the perfect house once I walked into the house. I suddenly had a feeling of this guilt and sadness rush over me. It was such an odd feeling, and I couldn't shake it. Once we were trying to organize the living room and decorate the fireplace. I'm not kidding. Suddenly, the logs on the fireplace literally flew off the grate they were sitting in. At the time, we just thought the logs were not holding together right, so we just reorganized it and moved on with that day. Once I got everything gathered in my room, I decided I would go take a shower. My bathroom has 2 doors. When you first walk in, you see a huge mirror covering the entire wall with a sink. To the left of the sink, there's a door, and behind that door is the toilet and shower. As I was waiting for the water to warm up, I started to do my face skincare routine, and I was using the large mirror in my bathroom. And I saw this tall, dark figure, and I just stared at him. I couldn't scream. I was so scared. I stared right into his eyes until he vanished into thin air. I never told anyone that night what had happened. Once we moved into that house, everyone had changed. We used to be a happy family, but everyone turned into a different person, filled with anger. We barely spoke to each other and seemed to have so much hatred towards each other. Ever since I saw that black figure, I felt myself changing too, and not in a good way. I started not wanting to go back to that house. I tried everything in my power to go back, but I couldn't leave. Something kept me wanting to go back. See, once I started staying more, it's like you're addicted. You knew you were changing, but you loved it. Since the COVID-19 pandemic happened, I got laid off my job. This is where I begin to see the house become more threatening at night. I used to work overnights at my job. During the pandemic, I got diagnosed with severe asthma. My lungs were not taking as much oxygen as they should due to my premature lungs, so they had to connect me on to a special oxygen tank to help me breathe at night. This tank is very loud, so I fall asleep with headphones on, of course on full volume. I remember this dream feeling lively, but when I tried to wake up, I just couldn't. I felt like I had to lie there and finish this dream. I remember seeing myself in the dream, watching from the distance. I felt angry, seeing myself, and I wanted to hurt myself. Remember how I said to keep in mind where the doors were located? This is why. In my dream, I saw myself walking around the house, being escorted by this elderly woman with a very scary smile. While the shadow man is nearby, I see myself dancing. Then behind myself, I see the same black figure sort of controlling me as if I was a puppet for him. The shadow figure made me go out the door facing towards the abandoned house and made me go into the house and light it on fire. I felt the flames roaring through my body. I woke up terrified. I must have screamed in my dream because my parents came running in instantly and I looked everywhere around my room for him. I felt as if he was watching me in real life. Constantly, throughout many nights, I kept hearing knocking, echoing throughout the house. I wasn't the only one hearing these knocks. My family would hear them too. We would ask each other, who was knocking? But nobody would say it was them. My sister bravely came to tell me she is being haunted by an elderly woman who smiles widely, pointing to her as if she is saying, "Look behind you." I told her about my dreams I had been having about the black shadow figure I had been seeing. We came together, possibly trying to connect them, as if the old lady is telling my sister to watch out for the dark figure. Later that day, I told one of my closest friends about everything that's been happening to us. She has been living here in this cursed small town ever since she was born. She told me the history of my house and the house in the field. She explained there was an old couple who had committed a murder there. The mother shot her daughter and her husband. She then shot herself dead. A few years after that happened, a mother who was living in that house killed her toddler, and ever since then, People kept moving out of the house and never stayed long.
This is a series of strange occurrences that have happened to me throughout my life. I'm not sure why they keep happening to me, but they do. My parents were the first ones to move into our house. They watched it being built, so having so much activity seemed really weird for me at first. Then I learned the history of our land. Apparently, a lot of the people in my area used to find arrowheads in the field where my house is now, and it is rumoured to also be the site of an Indian burial ground. I'm not sure if it is or not, but my best friend's family did confirm that a lot of arrowheads were found. So even if it isn't a burial ground, people most likely died on our land. Not only that, but all the women in our family are quite sensitive to the paranormal, especially my mum, cousin, and I. My mum has always said I was sensitive, even as a baby. I knew when people died before anyone else did. I'd stare and point at absolutely nothing, and I still do to this day hear and feel stuff. When I was 2, my mum's friend's granddaughter died. Before Mum got the call, I was pointing to the sky saying, "There goes the baby, Mummy." The same thing happened when Dale Earnhardt Sr. died, saying, "There goes the Nazca man," before it was announced he was dead. I wouldn't sleep in my own bedroom until I was 7 because I always felt something bad was in there with me. I've always been able to sense when there was another presence in a room. I still do to this day, especially in my basement. My basement is a finished and furnished basement, not some dark, creepy one. When I was little, my parents made the one room into a playroom for me. I would refuse to play in there unless someone was downstairs with me, so my dad ended up turning another room downstairs into his own little man cave for that reason. We used to have a camper that I would play in, and one day I looked out the window and thought I saw my dad standing outside of it, wearing dark jeans and a black shirt. I needed to ask him something, so I cleaned up and went over, but I couldn't find him. So I went up to the house, but he was inside on the computer wearing a red shirt. When I asked if he was out there and then came in to change, he said he'd been in there with the same shirt for hours. My brother used to see a woman in white and could describe her in perfect detail, right down to the colour of her hair. I would not leave my room at night until I was 11-ish when we got our dog, because I knew something was in the kitchen, always watching. When I was 12, I was at my friend Sarah's house, which is definitely haunted. I closed my eyes and saw a horrific scene play out. I saw a man in black chasing a young girl, no older than 7 or 8, and she ended up falling over the banister above the dining room. I still remember every detail of the girl, from her curly brown hair to the buttons on her blue and white dress. Records of the girl are unsure since it was a long time ago, but a man did die in that house not too long ago, the 1940s I think, maybe a little later. At the age of 13, my friends and I did an EVP in a cemetery across from her house, and after we heard a noise, I asked if they could do it again. It happened again, and we bolted out of there. At 14, I was at my friend's house when my mum texted me and told me something pulled on her hoodie when she was doing the dishes. When I was 19, I moved into the hotel I worked at to get away from my physically abusive ex. A month into living there, I found out I was pregnant. Now, this hotel is known to be haunted and actually has frequent ghost tours by a group of paranormal investigators and has even been on the Travel Channel. I lived across from the most haunted room in the hotel, and I honestly think that made my depression even worse. I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep, quit taking my epilepsy medications. I constantly heard and felt things around me in that hotel. One day, while I was working, I was cleaning in one of the rooms, and felt a burning sensation on my back. When I lifted my shirt up, 3 scratches began to appear on my back. The paranormal group I mentioned above did an EVP session afterwards, and after 20 minutes of voices saying, "We didn't scratch her," one voice said, "Michael did it." Michael is known to be the little boy that wanders around the hotel for his mother. Not too long after, I found out I was pregnant. I was actually really excited and saw this baby as the light at the end of the tunnel. So when a couple of people from the group came to the hotel for a birthday party, we went back to that room for an EVP with me in there. When asked why it scratched me, it said, "Protecting her." And when we asked why and from what, it said, "She's pregnant." There's another ghost in that hotel that I didn't piece together until it was too late. They call her the Lady in Black, and I 100% believe she took my baby from me. A co-worker told me a story about when his friend was going through the yearly haunt they have in October. A lady in black told her she was going to steal her unborn baby. Not long after that, she miscarried. After my miscarriage, I moved back in with my mother. A few months later, the power went out in the hotel while I was working. When I was going to the bathroom, I heard a petite voice say, "Mummy?" I cried for hours because I knew that my baby was trapped in there. A year ago, my mum was laying in bed and started falling asleep. She opened her eyes for a second and saw a face staring down at her. She didn't dream it. She was still awake. In 2019, I moved into an apartment with my best friend, not knowing it was the scene of a murder-suicide until the lease was signed. I don't believe they're still there, but you can feel the residual energy where it happened. There are multiple entities in that apartment though, one of which seems inhuman. A week ago my boyfriend was over and he woke up at around 6 a.m. to see a creature crawling on the ceiling. The same thing my best friend saw after we moved in. In January of 2020, I had recently got out of the hospital and my best friend had to go to her grandparents' house, so my downstairs neighbour friend said she'd come and stay with me. As we were laying in bed, she opened her eyes and said, "Not to freak you out, but there's a man above me staring at me." Obviously, I freaked out. I'm back at my mum's place until my boyfriend and I find a place of our own. And lately, for the past year or two, I've had to cleanse the house once a month, or else the activity really picks up. I can still feel negative energy at night.
What a night! I feel so invigorated. I must cast a spell tonight. The weather is perfect for it. Keep rating and reviewing the show, kiddies, as it helps us to be discovered by more people. And I'll see you all next week. Nighty-night.